Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Paul, and in this Gaming Tycoon video we're going to be discussing and analysing tech news which, as usual, has popped up over the past 24 or so hours. We're going to be starting things out with good news from Intel. The Z390 platform will indeed support existing Coffee Lake S processors. Then we're going to move over to the server-orientated market, because Intel will be offering glueless 8-socket scalability with Cascade Lake, and this actually ties in rather nicely with a story that's also going around with Elon Musk speaking as to why the venerable Jim Keller left Tesla and has moved on to Intel. So we're going to be discussing what he is actually doing there, at least according to Mr. Elon Musk. But as I said, first things first, the Z390 platform. While details exactly what the Z390 platform will bring to the table are somewhat sketchy, and that's putting it mildly, we can ascertain with the timing of these leaks that it's probably only a couple of months away, and this ties in rather nicely with the leaks that we saw just a couple of days ago with the roadmaps which appeared on the internet. So if you want that information, I'll link it in the video description. But the website videocards.com have managed to snag a couple of 3D mark entries, and they show the Supermicro motherboard currently identified as C9Z390CGIW, and it is running with two processors which are LGA 1151, which is obviously very interesting because this is a confirmation that the Z390 socket is identical to the other 300 series motherboards. So what we have here is an i7-8700T, which is a 6-core 12-thread processor, and that is paired of course with 8GB of memory in this particular test, and once again that's on the Supermicro C9Z390CGIW. I'm just going to call it a Supermicro board for the remainder of this video. And we also see the Z390 paired up with the i7-8700K. Of course I don't need to introduce this, but it is a 6-core 12-thread processor as well. But the difference between it and the T is a low power part, and of course the K is the super unlocked. You can clock it as high as you can based upon your cooling setup and of course the quality of that particular chip. So we know at the very least you have forwards compatibility, I suppose, with the 8700K if you want to purchase, let's say, a Z390 motherboard. So let's say you have a lower specification Intel board and you want to perhaps go for the Z390, but let's say for the sake of argument that the 8-core Intel processors are difficult to procure at the launch, then at the very least you could, let's say, use the 8700K in the short term and then simply plonk in your 8-core processor when they are finally available in large quantities. But of course we don't know how large quantities they might have. I'm simply saying that if Intel do have yield issues, or perhaps if they're insanely popular, or perhaps if there's price gouging, you may decide to wait a bit. What isn't so clear is if you already have an existing 300 series board, whether you're going to be able to enjoy the luxury of simply plonking in an 8-core processor. For the sake of this video, I'm just going to call it the 8800K, but it also could be the 9700K or something very different. So now we're going to move over to a server architecture which is designed to take on AMD's Epyc range of processors. Oh, and a small bonus piece of news, and this comes to me from one of my friends actually who was speaking to me on Facebook. I don't know how many of you will find this useful, but I'll quickly mention it. But if you are running VMware version 6.7, their hypervisor has actually been updated now to support Epyc processors. Beforehand, Epyc processors could not function with SMT enabled. Of course, that wasn't a problem with Intel, but that's just for your FYI. So now we have some links which have come to us from Intel's Saudi conference, and they of course appeared online. And we can definitely see that Intel have been taken aback by how competitive AMD have been with Epyc and their range of processors. As a quick reminder, when you are talking about Epyc, you have 64 cores per system and 128 threads total if you are using a 2-socket AMD Epyc motherboard. And Intel have decided to offer now dual, quad and octa-core sockets for Cascade Lake. So what about the specifications of the chips themselves? Well, we have 56 logical cores, that's of course with hyper-threading, so in reality you have 28 cores per processor. And we also have further confirmation that we have a 6-channel memory controller inside of Cascade Lake. So just for a point of comparison, you have an 8-channel memory controller with Epyc, but perhaps the specification which is going to upset the most amount of people is the fact that you only have 48 PCIe lanes per CPU. Just as a reminder, if you take a look at Epyc's spec sheet, you have 128, I'm just going to repeat that again, 128 PCIe lanes per CPU. So no, not total on the motherboard, but per processor. Obviously in systems which are heavily I/O focused, perhaps if you're doing like high performance computing, doing a lot of GPU work, have a lot of GPUs actually in the system, obviously this is going to be a critical factor that is going to certainly lend itself towards AMD, or the decision for your company to lend itself towards going with AMD. We also have a series of diagrams which demonstrate how the 2-socket, 4-socket, 8-socket configurations will work, at least according to Intel themselves, and how data will flow between the various memory banks and various processors and other components within the system. The 2-socket configuration looks pretty simple. By the time you get to the 8-socket configuration, I imagine there's going to be a lot of optimization that goes into this. Perhaps the biggest factor between Intel and AMD when it comes to the server market, though, is the pricing. And AMD are definitely started to make strides here when it comes to being competitive. But of course, the future is not written yet, particularly when it comes to business. And it's rather interesting because these things come to us within pretty much the same time as an earnings call from Tesla. And Elon Musk was actually speaking about this and why Jim Keller left the company. He said, and I quote, Jim Keller will be leaving to go to design a new server architecture at Intel. He was then questioned, as a follow-up, could you comment on Jim Keller's departure? He's a highly respected architect. What does it say? The development of Tesla's custom silicon and autopilot, what impact did he have when he left? And Elon said, and I quote, well, Jim's a great guy and there's sort of a career he wanted to pursue for a long time, which is kind of design how a server architecture works. Something I find a little bit interesting, but something that it's been a sort of a personal dream, Jim, to do, and that's why he went to Intel. The design of the Tesla hardware is primarily led by Pete Bannon. I should be clear, the lead designer of that is Pete Bannon, who is still with Tesla, and of course, Andrei Karpathy, hopefully I pronounced that correctly, is head of AI team. So we don't plan to hire a replacement for Jim's position, end quote. Of course, if you were to think about this pretty broadly, there's a lot of parts that technically Jim could be working on. I mean, he could be working on the memory controllers, he could be working on PCIe, he could be working on the platform, networking, the actual core itself. He could be designing anything, but it would appear based upon these comments that it's a more broad level, higher level role. It's not something that would be one particular component. Perhaps instead he would be designing the overarching architecture of this future designed processor. Most likely the post that we've just heard about Cascade Lake, just for clarification's sake here, is nothing to do with Jim Keller. After all, there's no way he could have had any impact. Instead, my point with the situation is to illustrate that Intel are definitely feeling, at least internally, they probably wouldn't want to admit it publicly, that they are somewhat playing catch up here. This is one of the reasons that we're starting to see Ocean Cove leaks appear. And obviously we saw the job listing pop up about 6 or 7 days ago that Ocean Cove is going to be the next revolutionary architecture from Intel. And it would appear, at least according to what Tesla is saying, or more specifically Elon Musk, that quite honestly, the primary reason for Jim to abandon the Tesla ship is to focus on an architecture, and that which is for servers. So obviously, this might act as a trickle down eventually, because server architectures, of course, when they're scaled down and properly designed around a specific pricing point, can certainly find their way into desktops and other type of hardware. But it would appear that Intel are definitely feeling pressure on the server side. So it's going to be very curious to see how over the next several years, before Ocean Cove is available to Intel's server customers, how AMD will be able to snag some of the market share. And of course, it's also worth noting that it's not down to just Intel to play catch up. And I'm not saying that Intel solutions are worse than AMD. I'm simply saying from a value proposition, AMD are stealing market share from Intel. But that isn't to say that the story's done. It's not just for now. Obviously, you've got the Zen Plus architecture versions of Epyc, which are probably going to start rolling out, and this is going to continue with Zen 3 or Zen 2 or whatever ends up happening, and eventually Intel are going to have to counter with that, and well, it's going to be kind of curious. So for the next several years at least, so the next 2 or 3, Intel and AMD are going to have a very interesting game of one-upmanship. But with that said, hopefully you've enjoyed the video. Normal stuff, like, share and subscribe, and if you do subscribe, I'd encourage you greatly to click on that bell icon. With all of that said, thanks very much for watching the video, have a great day, take care, and bye for now.